The scent of smoke and whiskey hung heavy in the warm evening air as Violet Adams hurried down the main street of Sweetwater, Texas. It was 1878, and the small frontier town was alive with the usual Friday night commotion, raucous laughter spilling from saloons, the distant strumming of a poorly tuned piano, and the occasional gunshot that no longer made her flinch. What did make her heart race, however, was the realization that she had taken the wrong turn on her way home from her job at the millinery shop. The shortcut through the back alley behind the Silver Dollar Saloon had seemed like a good idea until 5 men materialized from the shadows, their intentions clear in their wolfish grins and the hungry gleam in their eyes. Violet clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her breath catching in her throat as they formed a semicircle around her. Well, what do we have here?" drawled a bearded man with a scar slashed across his left cheek. "Mighty dangerous for a pretty lady to be wandering alone at night." "I'm just heading home," Violet said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Please let me pass." "Oh, we'll let you pass," another man chimed in, a silver tooth glinting as he smiled. "After we get acquainted." Violet's hand slid to her pocket where she kept a small knife. She wasn't defenseless, but she wasn't foolish enough to think she could take on 5 men. Her green eyes darted around, searching for an escape route, but they had her cornered. "I believe the lady isn't interested in your company," came a deep voice from behind the men. They turned, and Violet peered through the gap that formed between them. A tall figure stood at the entrance of the alley, silhouetted against the dim street lamps. As he stepped forward, the light caught the gleam of a sheriff's badge on his chest, but it was the steady authority in his stance that commanded attention more than the metal pin. "She walks with me tonight," he stated simply, his hand resting casually on the holstered Colt at his hip. The men exchanged glances, sizing up the newcomer. He was lean but broad-shouldered, with dark hair peeking from beneath a black Stetson. His face was half-shadowed, but Violet could see the stern set of his jaw and the unwavering intensity of his gaze. "We were just having a friendly conversation, Sheriff," the scarred man said, backing away slightly. "Conversation's over," the sheriff replied. "Move along, gentlemen." There was a tense moment where Violet thought they might challenge him, 5 against 1, but something in his demeanor must have given them pause. Perhaps it was the calm way he stood there, as immovable as the mountains to the west. Or maybe it was the stories that had already begun to spread about the new sheriff of Sweetwater. With muttered curses and resentful glares, the men dispersed, slinking back into the shadows from which they had emerged. The sheriff stepped forward, and Violet saw his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30, with striking blue eyes that assessed her carefully. "Are you hurt, Miss Adams?" he asked, Violet's eyebrows raised in surprise. "You know my name." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Isaac Porter," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "And yes, I make it my business to know the citizens of Sweetwater, especially those who work for Mrs. Thornton, who happens to be my landlady and mentions you quite often." Violet couldn't help but smile. Mrs. Thornton, her employer at the millinery shop, was known for her matchmaking attempts as much as for her elaborate hat designs. "I appreciate your intervention, Sheriff Porter," she said, smoothing down her skirt with slightly trembling hands, "though I was prepared to defend myself." She patted her pocket meaningfully. "I don't doubt that," he replied, and there was no condescension in his tone, only a genuine respect that caught her off guard. "But 5 to 1 aren't odds I'd want anyone to face alone. May I escort you home?" Violet hesitated only briefly. The proper thing would be to decline. She'd only met the man after all. But the alley incident had shaken her more than she cared to admit, and there was something reassuring about Sheriff Porter's presence. "Thank you," she nodded. "I live on Willow Street." "I know," he said, offering his arm. At her questioning look, he added, "Mrs. Thornton, remember?" Violet laughed softly, taking his arm. "Of course. Does she tell you everything about me?" "Only the good parts," Isaac replied with a warm smile that transformed his serious face. "And according to her, there are many." As they walked through the streets of Sweetwater, Violet found herself talking more freely than she normally would with a stranger. There was something about Isaac Porter that put her at ease. Perhaps it was the way he listened intently to her words, or how he spoke to her as an equal rather than with the patronizing tone many men adopted when addressing women. He told her he'd arrived in Sweetwater 6 months ago, taking over as sheriff after the previous one had been killed in a bank robbery. Before that, he'd ridden with the Texas Rangers for 5 years. She shared that she'd moved to Sweetwater 3 years earlier from St. Louis after her parents died of influenza, leaving her with little money but the skills her mother had taught her in sewing and hat-making. "Mrs. Thornton was kind enough to give me employment and a place to stay initially," Violet explained as they approached her small house at the end of Willow Street. "Now, I rent this cottage and have put aside enough to eventually open my own shop one day." "A commendable goal," Isaac nodded appreciatively. "Sweetwater could use more ambitious people like you." They reached her front porch, a modest wooden structure with a single rocking chair and a pot of yellow wildflowers she had collected from the prairie. "Thank you again, Sheriff Porter," Violet said, reluctantly withdrawing her hand from his arm. "Isaac," he corrected her. "And it was my pleasure, Miss Adams." "Violet," she returned with a smile. As she unlocked her door, he remained at the bottom of the steps, hat in hand. There was something in his expression, a hesitation, perhaps a question he wanted to ask but thought better of. "Good night, Violet," he said finally. "Lock your door." "I always do," she replied. "Good night, Isaac." She watched from her window as he walked away, his figure straight and tall in the moonlight. Only when he had disappeared around the corner did she realize her heart was still racing, though no longer from fear. The following morning, Saturday, brought clear skies and the busiest day of the week at the millinery shop. Violet arrived early, her mind still replaying the previous night's events as she arranged new ribbons and feathers on the display table. Mrs. Thornton bustled in just before opening, a plump, energetic woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Well, well," she said, eyeing Violet with barely contained curiosity. "I hear the sheriff escorted you home last night." Violet's hands paused over a velvet hat band. "News traveled fast in Sweetwater. He was kind enough to help me when I found myself in an uncomfortable situation," she replied carefully. Mrs. Thornton hummed, her expression knowing. "Isaac Porter is a good man, quiet but solid. Not like those drifters who pass through town making trouble." Before Violet could respond, the bell above the door tinkled, announcing their first customer. The morning passed quickly with a steady stream of women preparing for Sunday services, and Violet was grateful for the distraction from her thoughts about the sheriff. It was mid-afternoon when the shop door opened and a tall figure ducked inside, looking somewhat out of place amidst the feminine frills and laces. Isaac Porter had exchanged his black Stetson for a brown one, but his badge still gleamed on his chest. "Sheriff," Mrs. Thornton greeted him warmly. "What brings you to our little establishment? Finally decided to spruce up your wardrobe with a hat band or two." Isaac smiled politely at the older woman before his eyes found Violet. "Just checking in on Miss Adams after last night's incident. Wanted to make sure she was all right." Mrs. Thornton's eyebrows shot up, and Violet knew she would be subjected to a thorough interrogation later. I'm fine, thank you, Violet assured him, conscious of the warmth creeping into her cheeks under his steady gaze. It was nothing serious. It could have been, he said quietly, his expression grave. Those men were the Dahlin brothers and their friends. They've been causing trouble in neighboring towns. I've warned them to move on. Well, we appreciate your vigilance, Sheriff, Mrs. Thornton interjected, clearly bursting with curiosity but too well-mannered to press for details in front of a customer. Isaac nodded. I should get back to my rounds. He turned to leave but paused at the door. Miss Adams, there's a social at the church tomorrow evening after services. Perhaps you'd consider attending. Violet was aware of Mrs. Thornton practically vibrating with excitement beside her. I hadn't planned on it, but yes, I think I will. His smile was brief but genuine. Good day, ladies. After he left, Mrs. Thornton didn't even attempt to contain herself. Well, it seems our sheriff has taken a special interest in your welfare, Violet. He's just doing his job, Violet protested, though her heart fluttered at the thought of seeing him again. MMHMM, Mrs. Thornton replied skeptically. And I suppose checking on a millinery shop employee is part of his daily rounds. Violet busied herself with rearranging a display of combs to hide her smile. We have hats that need protection too, you know. Mrs. Thornton laughed, her eyes twinkling. Oh, my dear, I do believe you've caught the eye of the most eligible bachelor in Sweetwater. Just wait until the Henderson sisters hear about this. Sunday arrived with the tolling of church bells and a nervous flutter in Violet's stomach that had nothing to do with her faith. She wore her best dress, a modest but flattering deep blue cotton with lace trim she had added herself, and a matching bonnet with a single white ribbon. As she walked to the small white church at the center of town, she wondered if she was being foolish to read anything into Isaac's invitation. The church was nearly full when she arrived, and she slipped into a pew near the back. Throughout the service, she found her attention wandering, her eyes searching for a certain tall figure among the congregation. She spotted him standing at the side, near the door, a habit from his ranger days, she guessed, always positioning himself where he could observe everyone and be ready to respond to trouble. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean white shirt with a simple black string tie. When his eyes met hers across the church, he gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. After the service, the congregation moved to the adjacent meeting hall where tables had been set up with food and drink for the social. Violet found herself surrounded by the Henderson sisters, 3 unmarried women in their 30s who seemed determined to know everything about everyone in town. We heard about your adventure Friday night, said Mabel, the eldest, her voice hushed but eyes alight with excitement. It must have been terrifying, added her sister Edith, clutching her handkerchief dramatically. But then the sheriff came to your rescue, sighed Agnes, the youngest at 31. How romantic! Violet felt her patience wearing thin. It wasn't romantic at all. It was frightening, and Sheriff Porter was simply doing his duty. But he specifically invited you to the social, pressed Mabel. He's never shown particular interest in any of the eligible ladies of Sweetwater before. Perhaps because he's been busy keeping the peace, Violet pointed out, trying to spot an escape route from the conversation. She was rescued by the arrival of Isaac himself, who approached with 2 glasses of punch. Ladies, he greeted the sisters with a polite nod before turning to Violet. I thought you might be thirsty. The Henderson sisters exchanged meaningful glances before murmuring excuses and moving away, leaving Violet alone with Isaac. Thank you, she said, accepting the punch. For the drink and the timely intervention, he smiled, understanding her meaning perfectly. They mean well, I'm sure. They do, Violet admitted, but their well-meaning can be exhausting. They found a quiet corner away from the main crowd, and Violet was surprised by how easy it was to talk with Isaac. He told her about growing up on a small farm in East Texas, about joining the Rangers after his father died, and about his decision to settle down in a quieter role as sheriff. She shared her dreams of opening her own shop one day, specializing in both practical and fashionable hats for frontier women. "You seem to have a clear vision," Isaac observed. "That's rare." "I've had to," Violet replied. "When my parents died, I realized no one was going to build my future for me." Isaac's expression grew thoughtful. "I've noticed that about you, your independence. It's admirable." The way he said it, without any hint of condescension or surprise, as if a woman's self-reliance was the most natural thing in the world, made something warm unfurl in Violet's chest. Their conversation was interrupted by Mayor Simmons, a portly man with mutton chop sideburns, who needed to discuss some town business with the sheriff. Isaac excused himself reluctantly, and Violet found herself watching him as he spoke with the mayor, struck by the respect evident in the older man's manner. Later, as the social wound down and people began to disperse, Isaac offered to walk Violet home once more. The evening air was cool, and the stars were emerging one by one in the darkening sky as they strolled down Sweetwater's Main Street. "I've been meaning to ask," Isaac said as they turned onto Willow Street. "How did you come to possess such skill with a needle? Your work at the shop is exceptional." Violet smiled at the compliment. "My mother taught me. She was a seamstress for a wealthy family in St. Louis before she married my father. She always said that a good hat could transform not just a woman's appearance, but her outlook on life." "A wise observation," Isaac nodded. "I've noticed how women stand a little taller when they leave your shop." "You've been watching the millinery shop customers?" Violet asked, amused. Isaac's expression turned slightly sheepish. "I observe a lot of things in town. It's part of being sheriff." "And what else have you observed about me, Sheriff Porter?" The question slipped out before Violet could reconsider its boldness. Isaac slowed his pace, looking at her directly. "I've observed that you're kind to the children who come into the shop, even when they touch everything with sticky fingers. That you help old Mrs. Rivera carry her groceries even though she never says thank you. That you work harder than anyone else in that shop, but never complain." He paused, his voice softening. "And that your smile could light up the darkest night in Texas." Violet felt her breath catch at the unexpected poetry from this usually reserved man. They had reached her porch, and she turned to face him, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "I would like to call on you properly, Violet," Isaac said, his voice low and serious. "If you would permit it." Violet looked up at him, this man who had walked into her life just 2 days ago, yet somehow felt like someone she had been waiting to meet for years. "I would like that very much," she replied softly. A smile transformed his face, crinkling the corners of his blue eyes. "Sunday dinner next week, after church?" "Yes," Violet nodded, unable to suppress her own smile. He took her hand then, his touch warm and gentle as he raised it to his lips in a gesture that belonged more to the drawing rooms of St. Louis than the frontier town of Sweetwater. "Until then," he said, releasing her hand slowly. Violet watched him walk away, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. For the first time since arriving in Sweetwater, she felt a sense of possibility that went beyond her plans for a hat shop, a future that might include someone to share it with. The week passed in a flurry of activity at the millinery shop. A stagecoach had arrived with the latest fashion plates and materials from the East, and Mrs. Thornton was eager to create new designs to tempt Sweetwater's ladies. Violet found herself working late into the evenings, her fingers flying over delicate stitches by lamplight. Isaac stopped by the shop twice during the week, once on official business warning all the merchants about counterfeit bills that had appeared in a neighboring town, and once, transparently, just to see her. Each time, Mrs. Thornton found reasons to busy herself in the back room, leaving them alone for a few precious minutes of conversation. By the time Sunday arrived, Violet had finished a new hat for herself, a modest straw bonnet with a cornflower blue ribbon that matched her eyes, and a small cluster of silk flowers tucked along the brim. She wore it to church with a sense of anticipation that made her steps light as she walked down Main Street. The service seemed interminable, though Reverend Howard's sermon on patience might have been delivered specifically for her benefit. When it finally ended, Isaac was waiting outside, having exchanged his usual work attire for a well-tailored black suit and freshly polished boots. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she approached, his eyes appreciating her new hat with genuine interest. "Did you make that yourself?" "Yes," she admitted. "Just finished it last night." "It suits you perfectly," he said, offering his arm. "I've made reservations at the hotel dining room." The Grand Hotel was Sweetwater's finest establishment, boasting actual tablecloths and a chef who had once worked in San Antonio. As Isaac escorted her inside, Violet was keenly aware of the curious glances from other diners. The sheriff dining with the milliner's assistant was bound to set tongues wagging. Once seated, however, she found herself forgetting about the onlookers as they fell into easy conversation. Isaac told her about his week breaking up a fight at the saloon, helping a rancher track down stolen cattle, teaching the mayor's young son to fish in the creek outside town. "And you?" he asked. "How has your week been?" Violet described the new shipment of materials, her ideas for designs that would be practical yet fashionable for frontier women, and the challenging customer who had insisted on combining feathers that simply did not belong together. "I finally convinced her that less is more," Violet laughed. "Though I'm not sure she was entirely convinced." "Your diplomatic skills rival those needed for sheriffing," Isaac remarked with a smile. Their meal arrived: roast beef with potatoes and carrots, simple but well prepared. As they ate, Isaac grew more serious. "I should tell you," he began, setting down his fork, "that my position as sheriff comes with certain risks." Violet met his gaze steadily. "I'm aware of that. The men in the alley that night, the Dahlin brothers, they've been causing trouble again. I received word they robbed a stagecoach near Fort Worth last week." "You think they'll return to Sweetwater?" Violet asked, concern creeping into her voice. Isaac's expression was grim. "I think it's possible. They've made threats, said they weren't done with this town, or with me." "Because you interfered that night," partly, Isaac admitted. "But also because I've crossed paths with them before, during my ranger days. I was part of the team that sent their oldest brother to prison in Huntsville." Violet absorbed this information, understanding what he was really telling her. "You're warning me that being associated with you might put me in danger." "It's a possibility I can't ignore," he said quietly, "and one you should be aware of before." He hesitated, then continued, "Before things between us progress any further." The fact that he was considering a future with her sent a thrill through Violet, despite the serious nature of their conversation. "I appreciate your honesty," she said, "but I'm not easily frightened, Isaac. I didn't survive on my own this long by avoiding challenges." His expression softened, admiration clear in his eyes. "No, I don't suppose you did." After dinner, they walked along the creek that ran along the eastern edge of town. The late May evening was pleasant, with fireflies beginning to appear in the gathering dusk, their tiny lights blinking on and off among the reeds. "Tell me more about your dreams," Isaac said as they paused on a small footbridge. The hat shop, what would it be like? Violet's eyes lit up as she described her vision. A shop with large windows to display her creations, workbenches where she could teach young women the trade, materials sourced from across the country and even Europe. I want to create hats that are beautiful but sensible for life here, she explained. Too many designs from the East are impractical for women who need to work outdoors or travel long distances. You have a good understanding of the needs here, Isaac observed. Have you looked for a location? Violet nodded. There's a small storefront on Cedar Street that might be available in the fall. The current owner, Mr. Peterson, is considering retiring. I know the place, Isaac nodded. Good location. Not far from the hotel, so you'd get business from travelers as well as locals. They fell silent for a moment, looking out over the creek where the water reflected the first stars of the evening. Violet found herself wondering what it would be like to share her dreams with someone, to build a future that included not just her shop, but a life with a partner who supported her ambitions. As if reading her thoughts, Isaac turned to face her. Violet, he said, his voice low and earnest, I know we've only known each other a short time, but I feel. He paused, searching for words. I feel a connection with you that I've never experienced before. Violet's heart quickened. I feel it too, she admitted softly. He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. I don't want to rush things, but I also want you to know that my intentions are serious. In the fading light, his blue eyes were dark and sincere, and Violet found herself drawn to him in a way that went beyond his handsome features or his position in town. There was a steadiness to Isaac Porter, a quiet strength that made her feel both protected and respected. I appreciate that, she replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. And I share those feelings. His smile was slow and warm, transforming his usually serious face. For a moment, Violet thought he might kiss her, and she found herself hoping he would. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips once more in the courtly gesture that was becoming familiar between them. It's getting late, he said reluctantly. I should get you home. As they walked back toward town, hand in hand now, Violet was aware of a new sense of possibility unfurling within her, the future she had carefully planned for herself, expanding to include someone else. Someone who might walk beside her rather than direct her path. The following weeks saw a gentle courtship develop between Violet and Isaac. He called on her regularly, taking her for walks after church, bringing her wildflowers he had picked while on patrol in the countryside, and occasionally escorting her to dinner at the hotel. Violet found herself looking forward to these times together, the moments when his serious demeanor would soften into laughter, or his eyes would warm with affection as she spoke. But it wasn't all quiet dinners and peaceful walks. The reality of Isaac's position as sheriff intruded one hot afternoon in mid-June when gunshots rang out on Main Street. Violet was helping a customer try on a hat when the sound echoed through the shop, causing everyone to freeze. Mrs. Thornton rushed to the window. Heavens above! There's some kind of commotion at the bank. Violet's heart seized with fear as her first thought was for Isaac. Without considering the danger, she hurried to the door, ignoring Mrs. Thornton's protests. The scene outside was chaotic. People were running for cover as more shots were fired. Through the dust and confusion, Violet saw Isaac crouched behind a water trough, his gun drawn. Across the street, two men were firing from behind an overturned wagon. The Dahlin brothers, someone nearby muttered. They've come back. Violet's blood ran cold. She remembered Isaac's warning about the brothers having unfinished business in Sweetwater. Now they had returned, seemingly intent on settling scores. She watched in horror as Isaac signaled to his deputy, positioned at the other end of the street, then made a dash toward the bank door. A bullet splintered the wood beside him, but he made it inside. Moments later, shots came from a window of the bank, providing covering fire that allowed the deputy to advance. The standoff continued for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, one of the brothers fell, clutching his shoulder. The other, seeing his sibling down, threw his weapon into the street and raised his hands. Only when both men were secured and being led to the jailhouse did Violet release the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Isaac emerged from the bank, his shirt dusty and a small cut on his forehead but otherwise unharmed. Their eyes met across the street, and his expression shifted from professional determination to something softer, more personal. He gave her a small nod, an assurance that he was all right, before turning his attention back to his duties. That evening, after the excitement had died down and statements had been taken, Isaac appeared at Violet's door. His cut had been cleaned and bandaged, and he had changed into a fresh shirt, but the events of the day were etched in the tired lines of his face. "I heard you came out during the shooting," he said without preamble, his tone carrying a note of reproach. "I was worried about you," Violet replied simply. Isaac's expression softened. That means a great deal to me, Violet, but it was dangerous. The Dahlin brothers wouldn't hesitate to shoot a bystander." "I know," she acknowledged. "It wasn't a rational decision." He stepped closer, raising a hand to gently touch her cheek. "Few decisions of the heart are," he said quietly. The tenderness in his touch and the warmth in his eyes made Violet's breath catch. This time, when he leaned in, he didn't stop at kissing her hand. His lips found hers in a gentle, questioning kiss that nonetheless sent her heart racing faster than the gunfight had. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you in that alley," he confessed. Violet smiled, her hands resting lightly on his chest where she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "I'm glad you finally did." They sat on her small porch as the evening deepened into night, talking about the day's events and what would happen next. The Dahlin brothers would stand trial for attempted bank robbery and assault on a peace officer. If convicted, they would likely spend years in prison. "Will you have to testify?" Violet asked. Isaac nodded. "In Dallas, most likely. I'll be gone for a week or so when the trial comes up." The thought of him leaving, even temporarily, caused an unexpected pang in Violet's chest. It was a stark reminder of how quickly he had become important to her life. As if sensing her thoughts, Isaac took her hand. "I'll come back," he promised softly. "There's nothing that could keep me from returning to Sweetwater now." The unspoken reason hung in the air between them. Nothing could keep him from returning to her. The weeks following the Dahlin brothers' arrest brought a sense of safety back to Sweetwater. With the outlaws locked away in the Dallas jail awaiting trial, the town returned to its normal rhythms. For Violet and Isaac, this meant more time together without the shadow of immediate danger. One Sunday in July, Isaac surprised Violet with a picnic lunch after church. He drove a borrowed buggy out of town, following the creek upstream to a shady spot beneath a stand of oak trees. The summer heat was intense, but the canopy of leaves and the nearby water provided some relief. "This is lovely," Violet said as Isaac spread a blanket on the ground. She unpacked the basket Mrs. Thornton had helped her prepare. Fried chicken, biscuits, apple tart, and a jug of cool lemonade. They ate companionably, talking about the town gossip, Isaac's work, and Violet's latest hat designs. After the meal, they walked along the creek bank, removing their shoes to wade in the shallow water. "I spoke with Mr. Peterson yesterday," Isaac mentioned as they sat on a large rock, letting their feet dry in the sun. "About the shop?" Violet asked, her interest immediately piqued. Isaac nodded. He's definitely planning to retire in September, wants to move to San Antonio to be near his daughter. Violet's heart leaped with excitement. Then the storefront will be available. It will, Isaac confirmed, a smile playing at his lips. And I may have mentioned your interest. Isaac? Violet turned to him in surprise. What did he say? He said he'd be happy to discuss terms with you directly. He's always admired your work at Mrs. Thornton's. Violet threw her arms around Isaac impulsively. Thank you. This could be the opportunity I've been waiting for. Isaac laughed, holding her close. I've never seen you quite this excited before. It's a dream coming true, she explained, pulling back slightly to look at him. Do you know how rare that is? His expression grew serious, his blue eyes intent on hers. I think I'm beginning to understand, he said softly. The way he looked at her then made Violet's breath catch, as if he was speaking of a different dream altogether, one they might share. Later, as the afternoon began to wane, they packed up the picnic and prepared to return to town. Before helping Violet into the buggy, Isaac reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. I have something for you, he said, handing it to her with an uncharacteristic hint of nervousness. Violet unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a flower with a small pearl at its center. Isaac, it's beautiful, she breathed, running her finger over the intricate petals. It was my mother's, he explained. One of the few things I have from her. When I saw your passion for beautiful, practical things, I thought she would want you to have it. The significance of the gift, an heirloom from his family, was not lost on Violet. She looked up at him, touched beyond words. I know it's not much compared to the fine jewelry ladies wear back east, Isaac continued, misinterpreting her silence. No, Violet said quickly, it's perfect, more meaningful than anything that could be bought in a store. She carefully pinned the brooch to her dress. I'll treasure it always. His smile was warm and relieved. It looks right on you, he said simply. As they drove back toward town, the setting sun painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Violet found herself contemplating how much her life had changed in the short weeks since that night in the alley. What had begun as a frightening encounter had somehow opened the door to a relationship she had never expected to find in Sweetwater or perhaps anywhere. The summer heat intensified as July gave way to August. Sweetwater baked under the relentless Texas sun. The creek that had provided such pleasant respite during their picnic, now reduced to a sluggish trickle. Despite the oppressive weather, the town continued its routines, with businesses opening early to catch the cooler morning hours and closing during the worst of the afternoon heat. At the millinery shop, Violet worked on lighter designs suitable for the season while already planning ahead for fall styles. Her savings had grown steadily, and after a promising conversation with Mr. Peterson, she was increasingly confident that she would be able to secure the Cedar Street location for her own shop come September. Isaac, meanwhile, found himself busier than usual. The heat seemed to shorten tempers across town, leading to more disturbances at the saloons and occasional disputes between ranchers over water rights for their cattle. Despite his increased workload, he made time to see Violet almost daily, even if just for a brief visit to the shop or a shared cup of coffee at the hotel restaurant. Their courtship had become a familiar sight in Sweetwater, no longer generating the whispers and curious glances that had followed their first appearances together. In fact, Mrs. Thornton had confided to Violet that many in town were simply waiting for an engagement announcement, considering it a foregone conclusion. You should hear the way the Henderson sisters go on about it, the older woman had chuckled. They've practically planned your wedding already, right down to the flowers and cake. Violet had blushed, but didn't contradict her employer's assumption that such an announcement was forthcoming. The truth was, she and Isaac had not discussed marriage directly, though their conversations often turned to the future in ways that suggested they saw their paths continuing together. It was during this sweltering August that Isaac received the news he had been expecting: a summons to Dallas for the Dahlin brothers' trial. He came to Violet's house the evening after receiving the telegram, his expression serious as he showed her the paper. "I leave in 2 days," he said as they sat on her porch swing, the only place with a hint of a breeze in the still, hot evening. "The trial is expected to last a week, possibly longer." Violet nodded, trying to ignore the knot of worry in her stomach. "Your deputy will manage things here." "Jim's capable," Isaac assured her. "And things have been relatively quiet lately, aside from the usual drunken scuffles." They sat in silence for a moment, the squeak of the porch swing and the chirp of crickets the only sounds in the gathering dusk. "Violet," Isaac began finally, turning to face her fully, "there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you before I leave." The seriousness in his tone made her heart quicken. "What is it?" He took her hands in his blue eyes intent in the fading light. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, seeing your strength and determination, your kindness and creativity." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I find myself thinking about our future more and more." Violet's breath caught as she realized where this conversation was heading. "I had planned to wait," Isaac continued, "to do this properly with a ring and perhaps somewhere more romantic than your front porch on a stifling August evening." A smile played at his lips. "But before I leave for Dallas, I wanted you to know my intentions." He slid from the swing to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Violet Adams, when I return from Dallas, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had begun to expect this moment might come, the reality of it, Isaac kneeling before her, his expression open and vulnerable, filled Violet with a joy that brought tears to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." His face broke into a smile that transformed his usually serious features, and he rose to sit beside her again, drawing her into his arms. His kiss was different this time, not questioning or gentle, but filled with promise and a passion that sent heat through her that had nothing to do with the summer temperature. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted. "I wanted to get you something special, not just whatever was available in Sweetwater." "I don't need a ring to know your promise is true," Violet assured him, touching the silver flower brooch she had worn every day since he gave it to her. "Nevertheless," Isaac said, "I plan to look while I'm in Dallas. They'll have finer selections there." They spent the rest of the evening planning in broad strokes a small wedding after his return, perhaps in September before the shop opening. They would live in his modest house near the sheriff's office, which had 2 bedrooms and a small garden that Violet had already begun to admire on her visits there. "We could expand it in time," Isaac mused, clearly thinking ahead to children and a growing family. The thought warmed Violet in ways she had never expected. Having lost her own family, the idea of creating a new one with Isaac filled a space in her heart she hadn't realized was empty. When Isaac finally rose to leave, the night having deepened around them, he held her close once more. "I'll be back as soon as the trial concludes," he promised. "A week, 10 days at most." "I'll be waiting," Violet replied, trying to ignore the small seed of worry that had planted itself in her mind at the thought of him facing the Dahlin brothers again, even in a courthouse setting. The morning of Isaac's departure dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching August day. Violet met him at the stagecoach, along with Deputy Jim Hawkins and a small gathering of townspeople who had come to see the sheriff off. "Take care of our sheriff, Jim," called Mr. Peterson from the crowd. "We need him back safe and sound." There were murmurs of agreement and several knowing glances between the onlookers, particularly from Mrs. Thornton, who stood beside Violet with a supportive hand on her arm. Isaac shook hands with the deputy, giving last-minute instructions before turning to Violet. Conscious of the watching crowd, he kept his goodbye relatively formal, though his eyes conveyed everything his words did not. "I'll send word when I arrive," he promised, taking her hand. "And as soon as I know when I'll return." Violet nodded, fighting the urge to throw propriety aside and embrace him fully. "Be safe," she said simply. He squeezed her hand, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I have every reason to be careful now," he replied quietly, his meaning clear only to her. As the stage-coach pulled away in a cloud of dust, Violet felt Mrs. Thornton's arm slip through hers. "Come, dear," the older woman said kindly. "The time will pass more quickly if you keep busy." True to Mrs. Thornton's prediction, the days following Isaac's departure were filled with activity. Violet threw herself into preparations for her shop, meeting with Mr. Peterson to finalize details about the lease, sketching layouts for the interior, and creating sample hats that would showcase her range of styles. 4 days after Isaac left, a telegram arrived from Dallas confirming his safe arrival and indicating that the trial was scheduled to begin the following day. The message concluded with a personal note: "Thinking of you constantly. I." Violet kept the telegram in her pocket, drawing it out to read throughout the day, finding comfort in the tangible connection to Isaac despite the distance separating them. The expected length of the trial came and went with no further word. As 1 week stretched into 10 days, Violet found herself growing increasingly anxious. Surely the proceedings should have concluded by now. Deputy Hawkins had heard nothing either, which only added to her concern. It was on the 12th day that a telegram finally arrived, not from Isaac but from the Dallas County Sheriff's Office, addressed to Deputy Hawkins. Violet was in the millinery shop when Jim came in, his face grave. "Miss Adams," he said, removing his hat, "I've just received news from Dallas." Violet's hand stilled on the hat she had been trimming, her heart suddenly pounding. "What is it? Is Isaac all right?" The deputy hesitated, his expression confirming her worst fears before he even spoke. "There was an incident after the trial concluded. The Dahlin brothers were convicted, but while being transported back to jail He cleared his throat. "They had accomplices waiting. There was gunfire." "Isaac," Violet whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was shot," Jim said, his voice gentle but direct. "The telegram says he's alive but in serious condition at the county hospital." The room seemed to tilt around Violet, Mrs. Thornton appearing suddenly at her side to steady her. Will he?" She couldn't form the complete question. "They don't know yet," Jim answered honestly. "The bullet hit him in the chest. The doctor is doing what he can." Violet's mind raced, her decision made almost instantly. "I need to go to him." "Violet, dear," Mrs. Thornton began. "Dallas is a long journey. I don't care," Violet interrupted, already removing her work apron. "There's a stagecoach leaving for Fort Worth this afternoon. From there, I can catch the train to Dallas." Jim nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll escort you to the stagecoach office." Within hours, Violet had packed a small bag, secured her ticket, and sent a telegram to the Dallas hospital informing them of her impending arrival. Mrs. Thornton had insisted on giving her additional funds for the journey, brushing aside Violet's protests. "You'll need lodgings, meals, and who knows what else," the older woman had said firmly. Consider it an advance on the work you've done. The journey to Dallas was long and uncomfortable. The stagecoach bounced and jolted over rough roads, filled with passengers who eyed the young woman traveling alone with curiosity. In Fort Worth, she barely made the connection to the train, running across the station platform with her skirts clutched in one hand and her bag in the other. The train, at least, was faster and smoother than the stagecoach, though the hours seemed to crawl by as Violet stared out the window at the passing landscape. Her mind filled with images of Isaac lying wounded, perhaps dying, in a distant hospital bed. It was late evening when she finally arrived in Dallas, a city far larger and more imposing than Sweetwater. Tired, dusty, and disoriented, Violet found herself standing on the platform as passengers streamed around her, momentarily overwhelmed by the noise and activity. Gathering her courage, she approached a station porter. "Excuse me, can you direct me to the county hospital?" The man gave her a sympathetic look. "It's quite a distance, miss. You'd best take a hack." He pointed toward the front of the station where several carriages for hire were waiting. The ride through the darkened streets of Dallas did little to calm Violet's nerves. The city was so different from Sweetwater, buildings taller, streets wider, the pace of life seemingly faster even at this late hour. When they finally pulled up before a large brick building with lights still glowing in the windows, Violet paid the driver with hands that trembled slightly. The hospital entrance was quiet, a single clerk seated at a desk looking up as she entered. "I'm here to see Sheriff Isaac Porter," Violet said, summoning all her composure. "From Sweetwater. He was brought in with a gunshot wound." The clerk consulted a ledger. "Ah, yes, the sheriff is in the West Wing, but visiting hours are over for the day, miss." "Please," Violet said, stepping closer to the desk. "I've traveled all the way from Sweetwater. I'm his." She hesitated only briefly. "I'm his fiancée." Something in her expression must have conveyed the depth of her concern, for the clerk's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Wait here," he said, rising from his seat. "I'll speak with the doctor on duty." The minutes of waiting seemed interminable. Violet sat on a hard wooden chair near the desk, her bag at her feet, exhaustion from the journey competing with anxiety about what she would learn. Finally, a middle-aged man in a white coat appeared, his face kind but weary. "Miss Adams, I'm Dr. Williams. I understand you've come a long way to see Sheriff Porter." "How is he?" Violet asked, rising to her feet. The doctor gestured for her to sit again, taking the chair beside her. "He's stable for now," he said, his tone measured. "The bullet missed his heart but damaged his left lung and caused significant blood loss. We've removed the bullet, but there's always a risk of infection in these cases." "Is he conscious?" Violet asked, clinging to the word stable like a lifeline. "He drifts in and out," Dr. Williams replied. "He's been asking for someone named Violet. I assume that's you," she nodded, tears threatening to spill over. "Please, can I see him? Even just for a moment." The doctor studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "Briefly," he agreed. "He needs rest, but I believe seeing you might actually help his state of mind. Often in these cases, the will to recover is as important as the medical treatment." He led her through quiet corridors to a small private room where a lamp burned low on a bedside table. Isaac lay motionless on the bed, his skin pale against the white sheets, a bandage visible beneath the edge of his nightshirt. Violet approached slowly, shocked by how different he looked from the strong, vital man who had left Sweetwater less than 2 weeks earlier. His face was drawn, his breathing shallow, and a sheen of perspiration covered his forehead. "Isaac," she said softly, taking his hand gently in hers. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening slightly as they settled on her face. "Violet," His voice was a rasp, barely audible. Am I dreaming? No, she smiled through tears, squeezing his hand. I'm really here. A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. You shouldn't have come. It's too far. Wild horses couldn't have kept me away, she replied, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. The Dahlands? He asked, his expression growing concerned. Don't worry about them now, Violet soothed. Deputy Hawkins told me they were recaptured. You just focus on getting well. Isaac's eyes drifted closed, his energy clearly limited. I found you a ring, he murmured, his voice fading, in my coat pocket. Esichiche, Violet hushed him gently. We'll talk about that when you're stronger. Dr. Williams appeared at her side. He needs to rest now, he said quietly but firmly. Violet nodded, understanding. She leaned down to press a gentle kiss to Isaac's forehead. I'll be back tomorrow, she promised. As she followed the doctor from the room, Violet felt a mixture of relief and renewed concern. Isaac was alive, but his condition was clearly serious. The doctor had used the word stable, not recovering or improving. What are his chances? She asked bluntly when they reached the corridor. Dr. Williams considered her question with professional candor. If he makes it through the next few days without infection setting in, his chances are good. The sheriff is strong and relatively young, but these next days are critical. He directed her to a nearby boarding house, where many families of patients stayed, and Violet secured a small room for what she expected might be an extended stay. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed that night, exhausted but unable to sleep, she found herself doing something she hadn't done since leaving St. Louis, praying, with all the fervor and sincerity her heart could muster, for Isaac's recovery. The days that followed established a new routine for Violet. She spent every moment the hospital allowed at Isaac's bedside, talking to him, reading to him from the newspaper, or simply sitting beside him, her hand in his, during the periods when he slept. Between visits, she returned to her boarding house room to rest, though sleep came fitfully at best. On the third day of her vigil, she arrived at the hospital to find Dr. Williams examining Isaac, his expression more hopeful than it had been previously. His fever has broken, the doctor informed her as she entered the room, and there's no sign of infection in the wound. I believe he's turned the corner. Relief washed over Violet like a wave. He's going to recover, barring any unforeseen complications, yes, Dr. Williams confirmed. Though it will take time, the damage to his lung was significant. He'll need to rest and avoid any strenuous activity for several weeks, possibly months. Isaac, more alert than he had been since her arrival, managed a weak smile from the bed. I told you I was too stubborn to die, he said, his voice still rough but stronger than before. Violet laughed, tears of relief springing to her eyes. I never doubted it for a moment. As Dr. Williams left them alone, Isaac reached for her hand. There's something in my coat, he said. The nurse put my belongings in that cabinet. Could you bring it to me? Violet crossed to the small cabinet and found Isaac's clothes, neatly folded despite the bloodstains still visible on the shirt. In the pocket of his coat, she found a small velvet box. Bring it here, Isaac requested, his eyes following her movements. She returned to his bedside, the box in her hand. Is this what I think it is? Open it, he encouraged. Inside was a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond flanked by 2 tiny sapphires. It was elegant without being ostentatious, exactly the type of design Violet would have chosen herself. It's beautiful, she breathed. I found it the day before the trial ended, Isaac explained. Was going to give it to you properly when I returned to Sweetwater. He paused, drawing a slightly labored breath. This isn't how I planned it, but I'd still like you to wear it if you're willing. Violet's heart swelled with love for this man who, even from what might have been his deathbed, had been thinking of her. "Of course I'm willing," she said, voice trembling slightly. With fingers still weak from his ordeal, Isaac took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Now it's official," he said with satisfaction. "And I have one more reason to get well quickly." Over the next 2 weeks, Isaac's condition continued to improve steadily. He progressed from being able to sit up in bed to taking short walks along the hospital corridor, his arm around Violet's shoulders for support. Dr. Williams was pleased with his recovery, but remained firm about the need for continued rest. "Another 2 weeks at minimum before you should consider traveling," the doctor advised during one examination. "And even then, the journey should be taken in easy stages, with rest days between." Isaac chafed at the restrictions, eager to return to Sweetwater and his duties, but Violet supported the doctor's caution. "We've waited this long," she reasoned. "A few more weeks won't matter in the grand scheme of things." During this period of enforced leisure, they had more time to talk and plan than they had ever had in Sweetwater. Isaac told Violet more about his childhood on the East Texas farm, about his mother who had died when he was 12, leaving him and his father to manage alone. Violet shared stories of her own parents, the happy years in St. Louis before the influenza took them both within days of each other. They discussed their future together in more concrete terms: the wedding they would have when they returned to Sweetwater, the house they would share, the shop Violet would open, and more tentatively, the family they hoped to create together. "I'd like at least 2 children," Isaac said one afternoon as they sat in the hospital garden, enjoying the September sunshine. "I was an only child, and it was lonely sometimes, especially after my mother died." "I'd like that too," Violet agreed, thinking of her own childhood with fond memories of her parents, but also a sense of what might have been if they had lived to see her grow up, marry, have children of her own. A boy and a girl would be nice. Isaac smiled, squeezing her hand. "As long as they have your spirit and determination, I'll be satisfied with whatever we're blessed with." As Isaac's strength returned, they began to receive more news from Sweetwater. Deputy Hawkins sent regular telegrams updating them on town affairs, which were proceeding smoothly in the sheriff's absence. Mrs. Thornton wrote long letters to Violet, full of shop gossip and assurances that her position would be waiting for her when she returned. "She also says that Mr. Peterson is holding the storefront for me," Violet reported happily after reading one such letter. "He's refused 2 other potential tenants, saying he gave me his word." "That sounds like Peterson," Isaac nodded. "Once he gives his word, he sticks to it." Finally, in early October, Dr. Williams pronounced Isaac well enough to travel, though with strict instructions about taking the journey slowly and continuing to rest upon his return to Sweetwater. "No resuming your duties as sheriff for at least another month," the doctor warned. "That lung needs more time to heal completely." Isaac agreed, though Violet suspected he would find it difficult to stay away from the sheriff's office entirely. His sense of duty ran too deep for complete inactivity. The return journey to Sweetwater was indeed taken in stages, with overnight stops in Fort Worth and a small town called Millersboro, before the final leg by stagecoach. Isaac, though much recovered, was still weaker than he wanted to admit, and Violet noticed how he tired by the end of each day's travel. Their arrival in Sweetwater caused quite a stir. Word had spread quickly that the stagecoach was bringing not only their wounded sheriff, but also his fiancée who had nursed him back to health in Dallas. By the time the coach pulled into town, a small crowd had gathered, including Deputy Hawkins, Mrs. Thornton, and many of the merchants and townspeople who had come to respect Isaac during his tenure as sheriff. "Welcome home," called voices as they descended from the coach, Isaac moving slowly but under his own power, Violet at his side. There were handshakes for Isaac, hugs for Violet, and curious glances at the ring now prominently displayed on her finger. Mrs. Thornton, never one to be shy about her opinions, declared it perfectly suited to Violet and commended Isaac on his taste. "Now," the older woman continued briskly, "when is the wedding to be? We have preparations to make." Violet exchanged a smile with Isaac. They had discussed this during the journey home and had reached a decision. 2 weeks from Sunday, Isaac announced, provided Reverend Howard is available. "So soon?" Mrs. Thornton exclaimed, though her expression was pleased rather than scandalized. "We'll have our work cut out for us, but it can be done." The following 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. While Isaac rested and gradually regained his strength, making only brief visits to the sheriff's office to consult with Deputy Hawkins, Violet found herself swept up in wedding preparations. Mrs. Thornton took charge, enlisting the help of several other ladies in town to ensure that everything would be ready in time. Violet created her own wedding, had a simple but elegant design with a small veil and silk roses that complemented the dress Mrs. Thornton insisted on making for her. "No bride of mine will walk down the aisle in anything less than perfection," the older woman declared, her skilled fingers working late into the evenings to complete the gown. Meanwhile, Mr. Peterson readied the storefront on Cedar Street, making small repairs and improvements that would allow Violet to open her shop shortly after the wedding. Isaac, during his stronger hours, visited the location with her, offering suggestions for display areas and helping plan the layout of the workroom. "You'll need good light," he pointed out, indicating the large front windows. "Perhaps a display table here, where passers-by can see your work clearly." Violet was touched by his interest and practical suggestions. "You're going to be a wonderful partner in this venture," she told him. "In all ventures," he replied with a smile, pulling her close for a kiss that promised much more once they were husband and wife. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect October Sunday with just a hint of crispness in the air that hinted at the coming winter. Violet dressed in Mrs. Thornton's spare room, the older woman fussing over every detail of her appearance. "Something old," Mrs. Thornton said, helping her pin Isaac's mother's silver flower brooch to the inside of her dress near her heart. "Something new," she continued, indicating the dress itself. "Something borrowed," she added, fastening a delicate pearl necklace around Violet's neck. "And something blue." This last item was a small blue ribbon sewn into the hem of Violet's petticoat, invisible to everyone but symbolic nonetheless. "There," Mrs. Thornton said at last, stepping back to survey her handiwork. "You are the loveliest bride Sweetwater has ever seen." The church was filled to capacity when Violet arrived. It seemed that everyone in town had turned out for the occasion, curious to witness the union of their sheriff and the milliner's assistant, who had captured his heart in such dramatic circumstances. Deputy Hawkins escorted Violet down the aisle, a role he had accepted with solemn pride when she asked him, having no male relatives of her own to give her away. At the altar stood Isaac, still a bit thinner than before his injury but standing tall and strong in a new black suit, his blue eyes never leaving her face as she approached. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Reverend Howard spoke of commitment and partnership, of weathering life's storms together, words that held special meaning for a couple who had already faced death and emerged stronger for it. When it came time for their vows, Isaac's voice was clear and steady, while Violet's trembled slightly with emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Howard concluded with a broad smile. "Sheriff Porter, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of the audience but full of promise for later when they would be alone. As they turned to face the congregation, now introduced as Mr. and Mrs. Porter, Violet felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a way she had not experienced since losing her parents. Here, with Isaac, she had found not just love but a place to belong. The celebration afterward was held at the hotel dining room, decorated festively for the occasion. There was a cake baked by the hotel chef, music provided by a small group of local musicians, and enough food and drink to satisfy even the hardiest appetites. Violet and Isaac moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their hands rarely far from each other's. As the evening drew to a close, they slipped away to Isaac's house, now their house on the quiet street near the sheriff's office. It was modestly furnished but clean and welcoming, with a few new touches Violet noticed immediately. Fresh curtains at the windows, a vase of autumn flowers on the table, and a new quilt on the bed in the main bedroom. Mrs. Thornton and some of the other ladies, Isaac explained when she commented on these additions. "They've been preparing while we were busy with other things." Alone at last, they stood in the center of what was now their home, suddenly shy with each other despite the months of courtship and the intimacies shared during Isaac's recovery. Violet reached up to remove her wedding hat, but Isaac stopped her hand gently. "Let me," he said softly. "I've been watching you create hats for months. I want to be the one to remove this one." With careful fingers, he unpinned the hat and set it aside, then slowly unpinned her hair, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. "Beautiful," he murmured, running his fingers through the auburn strands. Violet's heart quickened at his touch. "Isaac," she whispered, her voice catching. He drew her close, his kiss deeper now that they were alone, no longer constrained by the presence of others. "I love you, Mrs. Porter," he said against her lips, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, her hands sliding up to frame his face. "My protector, my partner, my husband." That night they came together as husband and wife, their union a tender exploration of love and trust. Isaac was gentle, mindful of his still healing wound but eager to express in physical form the devotion he felt for the woman who had captured his heart from the moment he saw her in that alley, surrounded by danger yet unbroken in spirit. For Violet, the experience was a revelation, a giving and receiving of pleasure that transformed their relationship, yet again, deepening the bond between them in ways she had only begun to imagine. As they lay together afterward, Violet's head resting on Isaac's shoulder, his arm around her, she felt a contentment she had never known before. From that first frightening encounter in the alley to this moment of perfect peace, their journey had been unexpected and at times perilous, yet she wouldn't have changed a single step. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Violet smiled in the darkness. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most dangerous moments in our lives can lead to the greatest joys." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "In that case, I'm grateful for those 5 men in the alley, though I never thought I'd say such a thing." "As am I," Violet agreed, snuggling closer to him. "For without them I might never have heard the words that changed my life." "She walks with me tonight," Isaac quoted softly. "And all the nights to come," Violet added, sealing the promise with a kiss. In the years that followed, the Porters became one of Sweetwater's most respected families. Isaac eventually returned to his duties as sheriff, though he was more cautious than before, keenly aware of what he now had to lose. Violet's hat shop, Violet's millinery, opened on Cedar Street a month after their wedding and quickly became known throughout the region for its stylish yet practical designs. Their first child, a son they named Thomas, was born a year after their wedding, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Eleanor. The Porter home expanded along with their family, adding rooms as needed and eventually a larger garden where Violet grew flowers for both the table and her hat designs. Mrs. Thornton, who had become like a mother to Violet, doted on the children and continued to run her own shop well into her 60s, though she eventually sold the business to a young woman whom Violet had trained. Sweetwater itself grew and prospered, the railroad arriving in 1885, bringing new opportunities and connections to the wider world. Through all the changes, Isaac and Violet remained constants in the community, their partnership a model of mutual respect and enduring love. On warm summer evenings, they could often be found sitting on their front porch, watching their children play in the yard or, in later years, discussing their days as Thomas and Eleanor pursued their own paths, Thomas following his father into law enforcement, and Eleanor showing an aptitude for design that suggested she might one day take over her mother's business. Sometimes, when the children were asleep and they sat together in the quiet of the evening, Violet would touch the silver flower brooch she still wore on special occasions or twist the gold ring that had never left her finger, and remember the night that had brought them together, a frightening moment transformed by a stranger's intervention, and the simple, powerful words that had changed everything. "She walks with me tonight." And Isaac, understanding without words what she was thinking, would take her hand and lead her inside to their bedroom, where they continued to discover new dimensions of the love that had begun in an alley on a warm evening in 1878. A love that had weathered danger and distance, injury and uncertainty, to emerge stronger with each passing year. It was a love story that became part of Sweetwater's lore, told and retold through the generations, how the sheriff had rescued a young woman in an alley and ended up saving himself in the process, finding in her the home he had always sought, but never found until that moment when their paths crossed in the gathering dusk of a Texas evening. And though life brought its inevitable challenges, droughts and floods, economic hardships and personal setbacks, the foundation they had built proved sturdy enough to weather any storm. For in each other, Isaac and Violet Porter had found not just love but a partnership of equals, a shared vision of what life could be when two people walked together through its joys and sorrows, its dangers and delights. As Violet had once observed, sometimes the most dangerous moments in our lives can lead to the greatest joys. It was a truth they lived every day, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the courage they had found in each other to build a life that, while not always easy, was rich in the things that mattered most: love, family, purpose, and the quiet contentment of knowing that whatever came, they would face it together, just as they had from that very first night.